Astronomers for Planet Earth is an organization of professional astronomers and educators dedicated to helping people understand the causes, consequences, and solutions for climate change. This webinar series brings in experts to share their work to help you, the listener, be better informed and able to make a difference. Our host is Dr. Travis Rector, an astrophysicist at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Dr. Rachel Mason obtained her PhD in astronomy from Edinburgh University in 2003, and by 2015, she was a tenured astronomer at the Gemini Observatory in Hawaii. At the same time, she found herself increasingly preoccupied with sustainability in food and farming. Essentially, how can we have abundant food, happy people and animals, and functioning ecosystems, all at the same time? In 2016, Dr. Mason took the radical step of returning to graduate school for an MS in sustainable agriculture. She is now a researcher at the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center at the University of Maryland, where she is studying how global changes like rising CO2 are affecting the nitrogen content of plants, and what that means for insects, animals, and humans that rely on plants for protein.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Travis Rector, and I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. And I'm also one of the organizers for a group called Astronomers for Planet Earth, an informal organization of professional astronomers, educators, and science enthusiasts and students. And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Rachel Mason. And she has made a very interesting career change, transitioning from being a professional astronomer to working in the field of food sustainability and the consequences of climate change on what is perhaps the most important topic that you often hear about related to climate change, which is the impacts of climate change on the food web. So today, Rachel is going to talk with us about how she has made that transition from going from an astronomer to working in this very important topic. So Rachel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for that nice introduction, Travis. And until 2016, I was an associate astronomer at the Gemini North Telescope in Hawaii. And there I did the same kind of things that many of you probably do. I supported infrared instrumentation. I specialized in infrared spectroscopy. And in my research, I mostly looked at active galactic nuclei. Not quite 5 years later, I am now at the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center in Maryland. And there I'm the co-PI of a collaboration which is investigating the effects of changes like rising CO2 levels and changing global temperatures on the nitrogen or the protein content of plants and the implications of things that eat plants. So clearly something happened in the middle. And what happened was I went back to university. I was a student again, and I re-emerged with a new career in a completely different field. So what I've been asked to do today is share some of my story. I think very few of you will want to do the exact same thing that I did, but nonetheless, maybe some of you are thinking about how you can refocus your work or your career in a more sustainability minded or environmentally focused way. And perhaps some of the things that I've experienced will resonate with you if you're just looking at possibilities and thinking what might be out there. I'll talk about some of the pros and cons of doing things the way I did. And I'll also make a few more general observations about looking at different scientific fields and changing careers in general that might be interesting to a broad audience. So first, let me just acknowledge that there is a wide spectrum of possibilities for working in sustainability or environmentally minded areas. Of course, you can work on sustainability projects in your spare time, which is what I assume that many of you at Astronomers for the Planet are doing. And please keep doing that. That's really valuable. We need that. If you want to bring sustainability more into your own research, into your working time, then you have some possibilities. So Brian Beckage is a man who was in the next office to me when I was at the University of Vermont. He's not an astronomer. He has degrees in, I think, ecology and statistics. And I know of his work because he was looking at the impacts of climate change on ecosystems in Vermont and related locations. And this was useful to me because of the research I was doing at the time. But he has increasingly moved away from pure ecology to realize that you can't really model the future of the climate if you don't include humans in those models, because we are what is changing the climate. And now he leads an interdisciplinary research collaboration that includes sociologists and policy experts and others, where they try and use models of human behavior and link them to physical models of the climate and look at how the feedbacks between these two systems impact the future climate. So as climate change progresses and people's views of the risks of climate change, then how does people's behavior change, and how does that feed back into the climate? So as astronomers who probably have really good technical data analysis and data visualization skills, then maybe there are some possibilities, if your job is flexible enough, to start some new collaborations and think about refocusing some research into that area. You might also think about making kind of a sideways or an upwards move into a new position. Ben McCall, for example, used to do research on interstellar chemistry. Now he's the director of the Hanley Sustainability Institute at the University of Dayton in Ohio. So quite a different and very sustainability focused position. Or you could leave your job and you could start again from the very beginning. And that would be me. So let me spend a few minutes just explaining what took me to this point and why that's the particular move that I decided to make. And it all goes back to the fact that I just really like to eat. And when all this was happening a few years ago, I was living on an off-grid rural homestead in Hawaii. And my partner and I were raising animals, raising chickens and goats, growing a lot of our own food. And this to me was satisfying in two different ways, because first of all, food for me just brings up a load of positive emotions, things like health and nourishment and pleasure and comfort and sharing food with friends and family. And at the same time, the kind of agriculture we were performing, just small scale agriculture, was really interesting, because I think thinking about how do the animals and the plants and the soil work together physically and chemically and biologically. There's so many connections there that this is a really fascinating thing to think about. And at the same time, I knew that that's not really what the food system is about, particularly in this country and increasingly across the world. The animals live in factory farms, the vegetables are picked by underpaid immigrant labor. The food that we eat is not necessarily healthy and nourishing, at least the food that's cheap and accessible to many people. And I kept thinking about, we're so insightful and clever as a species. We have so much technology and science. So why don't we focus all that to create a food system where you have happy people and happy animals and healthy food and functioning ecosystems? So I was sitting at Gemini at the time, and I'd been there for 10 years. And I was thinking, well, it's been a while. I should probably start thinking about the next thing to do. And I thought, well, it could be a faculty position, or I could think about going to one of the big new telescope projects, but those things would require so much energy to make them happen and to make them work out. Is that really where I want to focus my energy for the 30 or so years remaining in my career? And I thought, no, I need to go and do something different. But the problem about food is, no matter what you care about in the food system, there's a problem for you to solve. Whether you care about the treatment of workers or the treatment of animals, or deforestation for farmland or ocean dead zones, or the greenhouse gas emissions involved in doing all of this, or the fact that we actually grow enough food for 10 billion people right now, and we still have people who are hungry. No matter what you care about, there's something for you to work on. And given this, I thought, I just need really an extended sabbatical to spend time, have the time and space to explore all these issues and figure out where my place is within this system. So I enrolled in a Master of Science course. I left Gemini and enrolled full-time in a Master of Science in the Plant and Soil Science department at the University of Vermont, where I took courses in things like soil science and soil ecology, but also more social things like economics and food systems. And I sharpened my data science skills as well. I did a thesis on the effects of climate change on crop yields and runoff and erosion from Vermont's dairy farms. That was a modeling project. Then I had a little bit of funding for a few months to write up my research into some papers. And then I applied for and was awarded a fellowship to research greenhouse gas emissions from cattle production and translate that for a lay audience. And that was all really interesting. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the question that was at the back of my mind throughout this whole thing was, what next? What am I going to do next? Because in one way I succeeded. as I went through this process. I learned so much stuff and I picked up so many skills. On the other hand, I failed miserably in my quest to figure out exactly what thing I'm interested in and what I would like to concentrate on next. So I must have written about 20 applications, and I would think, oh, I can do project management. And there's this startup which is trying to apply blockchain technology to make sure that sustainability standards are adhered to in the food system and not cheated. So maybe I could do that. Or this organization is trying to find alternative protein sources to meat, and that's really interesting to me. Maybe I should do that. So I got plenty of rejection letters. When you have a PhD in one field and a master's in another, then it's quite difficult to write applications in a way that just explains to people who you are and what you're about and what you want to do for them. But in the end, I did get some offers and I chose to accept this one. And now here I am in Annapolis, Maryland, in a 2-year research position at SysInc, where we're looking at how are global changes like rising CO2 and rising temperatures and changing pollution patterns affecting the nitrogen content of plants. And the short answer is the nitrogen content of plants is declining. Nitrogen is essentially protein. So what does that mean for insects and grazing livestock and humans that rely on plants for protein? What does that mean for the humans that rely on grazing livestock for a livelihood? And what do we need to do about these things? This is a really fascinating project, and it's the kind of interdisciplinary team science which is really difficult to put into practice, but which is absolutely necessary if we're going to solve the really challenging problems that the world is facing at the moment. So I'm pretty happy about where I am now. At the same time, I am a researcher still. I'm still in academic research. And we need that. We need people who are examining the world and figuring out what's going on and working out how we should respond to that. So that's good. It's still kind of sustainability adjacent. I'm not doing advocacy and I'm not doing activism of the kind of thing that I'm sure a lot of you are. So as I think about the position that will come next after that, I'm still thinking about, well, is that an area that I would like to focus a bit more on? So let me just tell you a few things about the pros and cons of doing this great big career switch that I did by going back to school and being a student again. So the big thing for me was having the space to just explore, learn new things, acquire new skills, meet new people and go to new places. I've just learned so many cool things. Just to pick one of them, did you know that 50 million years ago, CO2 levels were super high? And we know because we study fossilized horse teeth that in that time, mammals shrank by about 30%. Like all the horses became tiny ponies. Like, isn't that amazing? There's so much stuff to learn out there outside of one's own narrow field. I also feel like I'm much better at programming in data science and statistics now than I was as an astronomer, kind of ironically enough. And I've spent so much time just reading and thinking over the last few years that I feel so much more knowledgeable and rounded as a scientist now. But everything has its downsides, and this route definitely has some disadvantages. The most obvious one is I took a massive pay cut. I got really lucky because I had a research assistantship and a teaching assistantship that paid for tuition and paid me a stipend to live on. But this could have been a really expensive thing to do. And this unfortunately means that going the grad school route is probably going to be impossible for many people who haven't had the kind of advantages in life that I've had so far. Another thing is that you really lose status when you go from being a mid-career scientist to a grad student again. At Gemini, people would ask me to do things because I've been around for a long time and I'd amassed the kind of expertise that made me useful. When I got to Vermont, nobody asked me to do anything because the stuff I knew how to do just wasn't very useful anymore. And that leaves you feeling kind of, And I find also that I'd be in classes with 20-year-olds and I would know exactly as much about subjects as they would, or even less. So it was okay because I knew this would happen and I was prepared. But still, I mean, it's something that you need to think about. Depending on the opportunities that are available where you are, this may involve being away from home and family. It's really important and maybe essential to have a partner and or a family who support what you're doing. And then the next career move may not be as clear as you hope, especially if you do a master's as opposed to a PhD. This is probably mostly an issue for people like me who just find everything interesting, but it's definitely something to bear in mind. So I'm sure I'm a bit of an outlier and most of you are not thinking about going this route. So let me just give you a few general observations about if you're considering moving into a natural science field, which is more focused on the environment or sustainability or social justice or anything that you're interested in. So one thing I realized is that other natural science fields really aren't too difficult to pick up. They have we all have kind of similar ways of thinking about what research is and how it should be done and how you write and how you talk about things. It's probably similar to learning a different language where the words are different, but the underlying grammar is very similar. And I have to report back from the field of agriculture that agricultural scientists have to endure exactly the same kind of horrible unit conversions and conventions that astronomers deal with all the time. It literally came across units of meters per foot at one point. So especially if you have a PhD in astronomy, I'm 100% convinced that you can learn whatever other natural science field that you want to if you're able to put the time in. But having said that, you have to remember that other people who have been in that field for longer, they know more than you do. Before I moved into this field, I was thinking about things like, so what is sustainability in agriculture? Is it like biotechnology, high-tech approaches that are supposed to be really efficient and just produce loads of food? Or is it more like natural farming approaches that don't rely on inputs so much and let natural processes like take care of things? And I was thinking, is this the kind of thing that anybody's thought about? And I got into this field and everyone was like, yeah, of course, this is something that everyone has thought about. We've argued and analyzed and picked this to pieces for decades. So you need to have a certain kind of humility when you move into another field. It's as if someone walks into your office and says, hey, astronomer, has it ever occurred to you that there might be planets around other stars? And you're like, yeah, actually, we thought about that. So that's natural sciences. As I alluded to earlier, if we want to solve the really big problems that humanity is facing, natural scientists and social scientists really need to collaborate, and fields outside the sciences as well. And when you start talking to the social scientists, that's when the grammar starts to get really different. They spend a lot more time unpicking the assumptions about, well, what counts as research and who sets the priorities and what are the values shaping all this? These conversations are really important to have, and I really encourage you to do so. Just remember that you may go through a phase of confusion and not understanding before you come out the other side a much more rounded person. And then finally, I just have a few recommendations in general for, I mean, specifically career changes, but perhaps big changes in general. One thing is that it's good to know yourself. It's good to think about what your goals are, what your tolerance is for risk and uncertainty and that kind of thing. Maybe you're this person over here who just wants to leap without a parachute and see what happens. But maybe you're more like this little fella who likes to be a lot more cautious in the world. Both of those things are absolutely fine. It does help to have some self-reflection, do some self-reflection and have a little self-knowledge as you make big changes. Then the more you can clarify your goals and interests, the easier it's going to be. It'll be easier to find the people and the organizations that you need to know and develop the skills that will be useful in this new area. And maybe put those two together by volunteering a little or collaborating with people and organizations that you would like to spend more time with in the future. You really need to talk to people. I hate to say this, but networking is really important. People are actually really generous. If you just get in touch with someone and ask them about their career, more likely than not, they'll be willing to share that with you. They'll be very generous with their time. But at the same time, the more you can make yourself a known quantity to people in your new field, so you're not showing up as a stranger and asking to work with them, then the more helpful that's going to be. And then I've just said all these things about knowing yourself and clarifying your goals. But really, the most important thing is probably to cultivate patience and flexibility and adaptability, because life is going to surprise you. You're going to get some things wrong. Some opportunities that you thought were there will disappear, and then unexpected new ones will open up in their place. So if you're able to just let some of that go, let it go past, and just be flexible and adaptable, and just deal with what life gives you, then that's really helpful. And honestly, if you already have an astronomy PhD, a science PhD, you're probably not going to starve. So I'd like to finish really by just I'd just like to say, if you're out there thinking, I would like to do something a bit more different, maybe a bit more meaningful, but I'm too old for this. It's too difficult to change. I should have done this 20 years ago. I've got too far into this. I can't change now. Well, that's not really true. It's never too late to be what you might have been. So I hope that was a little bit helpful. I'll be happy to chat with people at some later point. And thank you for listening.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Rachel. That's really interesting. I know for myself and many other astronomers in A4E, we're all wondering what level, we're all concerned about climate change, and we're all trying to figure out what level we are interested in transitioning and spending more and more time working on this. And so I think your talk was very helpful. So if you have a question for Rachel that you'd like for her to answer for the Q&A session, please go ahead and put it in the comments below. Thank you very much, Rachel, for your time today.
Right, thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed today's talk. Each of our talks is followed with a Q&A session that you can learn more about in the video description. If you're interested in Astronomers for Planet Earth, you can learn more at our website, astronomersforplanet.earth, and on social media as well. If you would like to be notified about future talks and events, please follow and join us.